Rohit Malrani, one of the co-founders here of Office Hours. We help out many individuals think through, of course, banking, buy-side opportunities, thinking through, of course, like in this situation, it's more specific around looking into investment banking as a whole. What a career in banking looks like, what is technical prep, behavioral prep, modeling, and of course, just how to think about a career in investment banking as a whole. So Yogi and I, in all honesty, known each other for a long time since he is my first cousin. So thank you so much for doing this. And I guess just like a real quick anecdote. I remember when I was in school at Northeastern, one time I think we were going to like pick up dinner and basically discussing around like, hey, listen, like looking into banking. And I was like, yeah, like I'm looking into like banking, sales and trading. And like at the time, sometimes you think like, oh, investment banking is around like investing as a whole, right? And not many people have a like real understanding of it. And I remember you like basically sat me down. You're like, bro, listen, investment banking is going to be like very different from sales and trading, right? Before I ever possibly like put you in front of someone, like you're going to need to know this, right? Just kind of like pure basics. So for what it's worth, like really excited that of course, like we're able to connect with you today. And then of course, just around the whole concept of like basically educating more individuals around banking as a whole, other than kind of like that, like templated what you read online, right? More like a real perspective here. So thank you, Yogi, for joining us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Anytime. Sure. Happy to help.
Perfect.
Awesome.
And I'm sure many individuals saw from the background imagery, a lot of experience, right, that you're bringing to the table. So we'd love to get a little bit of background from your end.
Sure. Yeah. No, so I am, I'm actually, in all honesty, I was a career switcher getting into investment banking. So I did my undergrad at Northeastern, computer science, worked for a few years in that field, realized I wanted to go into the finance sector. Only way to get over there, was really through going back to business school. So I went to Georgetown in DC, got my MBA, did the quintessential going to New York, was fortunate enough to get a position there at Merrill Lynch, worked there for a little while, moved around a tad in terms of investment banks. Especially when I was earlier in my career. So I joined Financo, wanted to be consumer retail. Obviously, as you know, Rohit, from a line of entrepreneurs, but also my family specifically is in the consumer space and was a sector that I really liked and followed. So I wanted to join a consumer retail investment bank, and that Financo is one of the very, very solid investment banks that was recently acquired by Raymond James. But all they're known for is consumer retail M&A. So it was the perfect place for me, especially as I was getting started. Did that for a little bit as kind of a first-year associate or second-year associate. Moved back to Boston, joined BB&T Capital Markets, a little bit more upmarket from Financo, more in the traditional middle market. Part of their consumer team, was there for a few years, and our team within the consumer team, which really focused on the automotive aftermarket, we were effectively left BB&T, a handful of us, to go start the auto aftermarket practice at Jefferies, which became very successful, doing many of the much, much larger transactions, right? So a lot of public company work, a lot of international work, a lot of debt capital markets as well, kind of expanding outside of traditional sell-side mergers and acquisitions, right? And so this is all as I'm building my toolkit and my skill set over time, really solid place, certainly to learn and to be. And I got to a point where I just wanted to work more with business owners and, still loved the sector that I was working in, but I wanted to work with business owners and smaller companies. So left Jefferies, joined Capstone Partners right in Boston. Capstone's one of the top, if not the top and most busiest investment bank in the country. We've got about 200 bankers, one of the busiest, lower middle market investment banks in the country that's focused, does a lot of private equity, but it's more geared towards the individual business owner. But these are lower middle market type of transactions. More so, we are going up market as well, but most of our deals are in the lower middle market. And we just got acquired about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, by Huntington Bank, which is a large universal bank that's based in, or traditionally commercial bank based in Columbus, with about 28,000 employees. So we're part of a much bigger bank, much bigger culture. So certainly have seen quite a bit in terms of different cultures and different work environments and across the investment banking spectrum, so to speak.
Totally. I mean, where to start there? You've been picking winners since day one, right? With various institutions getting acquired. That's phenomenal. And I mean, it shows also like kind of a lot of like consolidation within the space too, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the banks have been consolidating for quite some time. Yeah, there's no shortage of that. And that's not going to stop, we think, especially from the most recent one, right? I mean, Huntington is a great home for us. They did not have investment banking, traditional investment banking, such as sell-side mergers and acquisitions, advisory capabilities, income Capstone. So So certainly a great relationship, and it's a great marriage for sure. So we're all excited and looking forward to it now.
I love it. That's awesome. What sort of advice, we might jump around a little bit here with questions if you don't mind me saying, what sort of advice would you give to juniors as you kind of think about the consolidating market on the banking side of things? Some might say like, kind of go to like the biggest, best and brightest type of situation, very structured program, call it like elite boutique bulge bracket just to be able to get that. But then of course, at the same time, attracting more talent to Capstone as a whole, being like, listen, like we're a bit more boutique, we're a bit more focused, get a little bit more hands-on training here. Any advice you might give to juniors as a whole as they kind of like think about that?
I think a lot of that has to do with what you're really looking for, right? And what I mean by that is if you say, look, I want to be working on the top IPOs and the top bond raises in the country, and I want to go on road shows and things like that, you're going to get that at a bigger bank, right? That does not, there are pros and cons to both sides of the house, right? And the middle market as well, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But those type of products are not really serviced by or provided rather by the lower middle market banks. The benefit you get if you want to learn mergers and acquisitions, right? How to run a sell side M&A process and how to actually be the closest real confidant for about a 6-month time period to very wildly successful business owners. It's very tough to get that, especially as a junior employee. Or junior banker. It's very tough to get that at a larger bank. You're going to get that quite a bit more at a lower middle market or middle market investment bank like ourselves, right? So for example, our analysts as well as our associates, of course, they are in pretty much they take on more responsibilities. They're pretty much in every meeting, right? We trust them. We start letting the analysts run conversations with clients on their own. Wow. Clients will reach out to our analysts quite often to just ask questions or to get a little bit of advice. And if the analysts don't know, they pull in someone more senior. But at the same time, right, at the bigger banks, right, you're certainly going to have great structure. You're going to have great, training programs, and you're going to work on much larger deals for sure. Mm-hmm. You as a junior banker will likely not have as much exposure to the clients themselves, right? And if you do, it will be chaperoned, to say the least. So. Right. It just depends kind of what you're looking for, what you want to learn, how much diversity you want in terms of your exposure, and culture is a big thing. So what do you want to get out of it? Do you want to grind 90, 100 hours a week for a couple of years and then move on to something else? Do you want a little bit more of not flexible, but more so a little bit more of a work-life balance? Or do you want something that's a boutique, that's much more regional, that's much more hands-on, right? Mm-hmm. Where you do have much more of a work-life balance for sure, but at the same time, you're getting to work with business owners, right? So the spectrum is quite wide. It really has to deal with what the individual banker is generally looking for, right? And where you want to be. As you know, right, most of the bigger banks are in New York, Boston, Chicago, LA, right? I know I'm missing a couple, but Dallas, but boutique investment banks are everywhere, right? Yeah. You'll find them everywhere across, secondary, tertiary cities. You'll find that quite a bit with middle market banks as well, but much more with boutiques, right? So it also depends where you want to be physically. In this day and age, we talk about remote work. I would say, not to pivot, but I would say as an analyst, right, as appealing as that may sound, I would caution you to, really take on remote work, because investment banking, especially as a junior banker, is very much an
similar apprenticeship
model. Yeah, exactly. It's very much so. No matter what someone says, it's very, very tough to learn if you're not alongside the crowd doing it yourselves.
I agree. Honestly, to anyone that's kind of like listening in here, for what it's worth, like even right now, still, half the reason we travel so much and still engage and interact in person, not only because you develop better relationships, because that's like one way to, of course, like enable trust and understanding who you're working with, but two, of course, like learning through osmosis for anything that you end up doing, I think really carries a lot of weight. Yeah. And then, of course, if I think about it like being a fresh junior out of school, if someone told me like, hey, listen, like you don't need to necessarily live in the city, you could just like work from home, all these Zooms things and whatnot, like it's just not the same. My God, by any means. Half the time it'd be like, even my time in growth equity, we would like put it on pause. The general partner would be speaking, not even like literally. Sometimes you'd be listening, sometimes you wouldn't be able to be like, listen, like we're going to steer the conversation this way, right? I don't care what they're saying. We care about this. Let's figure that out. Can't do that in
Yeah.
a remote environment from what I know. Yogi, if you don't mind me asking, the pivot on your end, the transition on your end to banking, what attracted you to banking? I remember like this is like more or less way back in the day now, but even like the applications that you were doing for business school. Did you know you wanted to pivot into banking, going into business school?
Yeah, a little bit of what I wanted to do was really get into finance, but I wanted to be, front office, right? At the end of the day. My prior position before business school was in the consulting, or my prior employment was in the consulting world. So I loved talking to clients, right? I loved, putting presentations together and being more front office and kind of working on things that are very challenging and demanding and time sensitive, right? And things that need real attention to detail, but things that I could own and be proud of and be in front of some of the top executives at whichever firm that we're working with, right? I wanted to still carry some of those things over, right? But do that in the finance world. And so when you kind of think about finance, right, especially coming in, it's very tough to find positions that allow you to do just that, but also be at kind of the marriage of effectively strategy and finance, right? And investment banking is kind of perfectly in the middle of that. I'm getting to really leverage quant skills, or at least when I started, right, as a junior banker, for sure, really learn the quantitative side of the house, but also understand the qualitative side, right? Be able to see the bigger picture, work on very multiple projects at a time or multiple deals, be very client facing, of course, but also work on things that are extremely important, right? And go to the top of a company or your client's decision making. It needs attention to detail. It needs actual dedication for sure. And it just needs a lot of proactive thinking. So it's a lot of those qualities that I found in investment banking. And I certainly wasn't afraid and still not afraid to work hard and long to get it. But it's very tough to find that in somewhere, right? And you go into investment banking, you put in your couple of years and opportunities open up because you're able to just do so much, right? You learn quite a bit, couple of years time that, would take many more years somewhere else. It's very fast paced.
Well, you're 10,000 hours. You hit that bogey pretty quick, right?
I don't know when I hit that, but yes.
Of course, on your, But I mean, I think it's, they say it's like, it takes like 5 years or so for 10,000 hours, if I'm not mistaken.
Is that right?
2,000 hours divided by maybe like 360. Yeah, maybe a little bit. So what have you, right? 168 hours in the week. Someone do the math.
I don't remember reading the investment banking portion in Malcolm Gladwell's book, but
more
or less it'll get there. So I get it.
Exactly. No, interesting. I mean, I think that's why many individuals, especially, we find it that like, well, I mean, you see articles and posts and like Evercore and just a bunch of other institutions are like $200,000 like fresh out of school. Many individuals still not about it, focus on work-life balance, but still, I mean, no joke. We put up like a posting like this around, of course, Capstone hiring in the Denver office, right? And for what it's worth, I put it up maybe 24 hours ago, not even. I could tell you we have literally over 100 applicants. Still very, very coveted. The MBA, I guess if we can kind of like get into that a little bit, is that something that you recommend individuals think about more on the career transition side of things? If you're staying in banking 2 years, whether it be break, step away, kind of going back to school, you found it to be, I'm sure, like much more valuable than kind of like the Northeastern time?
Well, I don't know if valuable is the right term, but what I would say is if you're looking to be a career switcher, right? I mean, effectively, right, on my side, in my situation, I was a career switcher, right? So this was life-changing for me, right? And being able to kind of move into a whole new position and a whole new industry. But at the same time, right, if you go in as an analyst into an investment bank and you spend a couple of years there and then go back to business school, right? I mean, it may not make as much sense to go get your MBA. I mean, it really depends, right? But it may not make as much sense if your intent is to go right back into investment banking. If your bank is paying for it or part of it, sure, it certainly helps. Or if, you're looking to kind of expand your network and go from a boutique to a bulge bracket, for example, things along those lines help, right? But more of it has to do with the network that you get at that than it is the education, I believe. But at the same time, look, if you're a career switcher, there's no better way to do it. I switched from computer science to finance, and I wasn't going to be able to organically do that. And so it just made a lot of sense to go get my MBA. So yeah, it certainly is quite valuable, I feel.
Phenomenal. As you think about that as a whole, I mean, well, in all honesty, kind of just like the computer science side of things and like how much software has taken over our lives in the last like 5, 10, 15 years. Not so much like the question around like any regrets, anything of the sort, but of course, and I guess this kind of like parlays into the next part around like real passion, right? Around like whether it be automotive aftermarket, consumer as a whole, kind of what you mentioned on the family business side of things. How interesting is it on your end to really work and surround yourself with companies in an industry that you've genuinely liked, right? And been passionate about over
Yeah.
the last
I mean, I
10,
think
20
that's
years?
critical, right? I think that's critical to be, if you surround yourself. Look, I mean, in banking, the amount of time that you spend with your job, your career rather, the amount of time you spend with your colleagues, whatever sacrifices you make to get there, it better be worth it, right? And it better be something that you enjoy and something that you love, right? And look, I mean, first couple of years, you do it, right? You're going to be drinking from a fire hose and you will be learning a ton very, very quickly. But embrace that, honestly. I mean, those are, when I kind of think back to that, and I think about I still have late nights, but I think about those very late nights and working on very high pressure situations. I feel they made me much, much stronger as a person, as an individual and as a professional than anything else could have. Just you embrace that, you embrace the camaraderie that you get with it, the skills that you're learning, the exposure that you have. And frankly, one of the reasons why I joined Capstone is to make a difference in our clients' lives, right? And there's very few things in a business owner's lives that mean more, right? Putting family aside, that mean more than transacting in their business that they've built over decades, right? So kind of having that life-altering experience and you being there alongside them is phenomenal. And so having business owners that have built very successful businesses over 30, 40 years, alongside even looking at public company CEOs that have, gone to the top of Wall Street, having those guys text me as like an associate on the weekend asking what I think about X, Y, and Z is phenomenal when you kind of sit back and think about what's actually happening, right? It's kind of mind blowing, but you don't really get that in other careers. It's or you do in some, but it's very, very difficult, especially at a young age.
That quickly, right? I think that's like the biggest thing where it's just like arguably like, and I feel like this is why like student athletes have done really well, military folks have done really well, where it's like you're really starting at almost kind of like this, like, I mean, you're putting yourself at a position in my mind, even just like my couple years in finance, where it's just like, it's pretty darn difficult, right? If you're going to start over here where it's just like, all right, listen, I'm putting in the late nights, I'm putting in the hours right now. Technically, from a discipline perspective, things after that should theoretically get easier, only because in my mind, if you're starting really at the top. Now, of course, like the whole concept should be also like you're getting more efficient with your work, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. Like when you first started, like the amount of time maybe spent to do something compared to like, of course, like you telling an analyst, associate, a VP to do something today, I'm sure it's kind of like game changing, right? And now you have like basically like resources galore.
No, absolutely, right. And being able to, it just takes a little bit of time, right? You put in the reps to get there. And so you struggle at first, and that's okay, right? One of the reasons why you need to be there in the office and, be around other junior colleagues who are really able to, help you, right? Say you're working on a model and you get stuck on a ref error and you have no idea why that's happening. And the analyst next to you has one more year of experience, right? Guaranteed they've probably seen that in the past and they can walk you through it pretty quickly. Who else are you going to get that from at, 1 a.m? It's pretty tough to do. So it's very beneficial. But I think certainly when I started, right, it was challenging, especially coming as a career switcher, and having my MBA, but still doing some of the associate level tasks. And then honestly, like a year into it, I just got so much better and so much more efficient. And then you look to the next thing, right? Now, now that I'm really good at putting charts and graphs together and presentations and using CapIQ and doing models and things like that, what's next, right? And then I challenge myself with, all right, now legal agreements, because that's something that I need to get onto. So you kind of, if you're constantly striving to look at the next best thing or next thing that's a challenge and trying to teach yourself that, you continuously push yourself. And I just feel like banking allows you to do that at the end of the day. I think I answered your question and then perhaps digressed.
A little bit more. Yeah, no worries. The good part is that we start taking questions as well from the audience here. And then, of course, it just allows the conversation to go pretty darn fluid. CFA, compared to an MBA, I guess this is our first question around, given the person has taken econ in their undergraduate degree, would you recommend getting such certification, such as a CFA? And we get this question quite a bit, actually.
Yeah. So the folks that I've seen take their CFAs, not that many in investment banking. Right. It's more so if you want to be more in something more quant, right? And especially if you're going on the sales and trading route, especially if you're going towards wealth management, if you're going towards asset management and the like, over there, it helps quite a bit. I don't know if it's mandatory, but it's almost a necessity to have over there. Investment banking, you don't necessarily need it. So most of the folks that I've worked with, and I'm thinking across the 4 banks that I've been at, very few folks have their CFA. I certainly don't, and haven't taken any of those tests, but it's not a necessity.
Okay.
I think one thing, guys, one thing that I just want to pass along is I feel that younger folks kind of maybe not devalue, but they don't think about as much is really having a strong accounting skill set, right? And you think about finance, you think about, all right, finance is forward facing, right? Thinking about from an academic standpoint. I feel like not enough junior folks think about accounting, right? So having that very strong accounting skill set is almost invaluable, right? Because when you think about what you're actually doing, being able to decipher financial statements and analyze trends and do that very quickly, find where doing a little bit of forensic accounting, figuring out where not where the bodies are buried, but effectively along those lines, right? Where the pitfalls are in a company, right? That is invaluable. And being able to put that to use in Excel and putting models together, it helps quite a bit. So it's not often talked about. I think it needs to be.
Huge. So in addition to, of course, corporate finance as a whole, whether it be, of course, kind of like an FP&A or more on the accounting side of things, I'm just trying to think of like some of the financial reporting and accounting, some of the classes we took in like undergrad. But I mean, in all honesty, you can learn that right after, right? I mean, half the time, even within our curriculums of banking, we have an entire accounting section. It's really getting an understanding, of course, of like the numbers on the back end. Obviously, there is kind of that like forward-looking, like modeling side of the house, but really understanding like what all of it means when it comes to like tying it together, I think carries a lot of weight. But the good part is that, of course, for anyone that doesn't have that right now, you can really go about acquiring that skill set, and plenty of resources out there too, to be honest. As we look into this a little bit further, so when it comes to working remotely, and feel free others if you want to, of course, send over questions here. What are your thoughts on instances where you sit in a different city other than members of your team? Most tech teams have presence in both SF and the Valley in New York or Boston. How do you build relationships with those? So that question, but also, can you speak a little bit more about the Denver office that is hiring right now?
Yeah. Which one do you want me to do first?
Let's do this question first, and then we'll opine on Denver.
Sure, no problem. So on the remote side, obviously over the last couple of years, right, folks have kind of gotten used to being able to work remotely. I would say one of the ways that we like to get around it, make it work. And look, I mean, we've got a couple of vice presidents that are remote. We don't really have junior staff that are remote. They do have a flexible work schedule. So they're working a few days in the office, maybe 3 days in the office, couple days are up to them. Some will come in all 5 days, right? But I think one of the ways that we've gotten around it is myself and the director on our team and one of the other VPs, we actually set up weekly check-ins, right? So, and when we rotate, so through our bullpen. So we've got a calendar. Now I'm talking with Jim and now I'm talking with Joe, or I'm making these names up, right? But effectively every week I'm talking to 1 or 2 of the junior folks and just taking half an hour, putting my phone aside and just chatting with them, right? To make sure that everything's going okay and seeing how they're doing. And also just talking about their careers, right? I want to make sure that we're pushing the junior guys to do the most with their career that they want, right? And we want to make sure that folks are successful at the end of the day, right? And not just work on our stuff and move on with their lives, right? We want to make sure that we're developing the next set of bankers and they are happy and they are getting what they want out of it. So having kind of check-ins, having actual scheduled time by Zoom, that's valuable. Another thing that we do is we actually have our VPs fly in once a month, maybe sometimes even twice a month, depending, and they'll spend a few days here, right? And work with the junior staff. So it's not just like they're remote, but they'll actually be here for a little bit, go grab a beer, go grab a coffee, whatever, but just spending time together and building that relationship, right? So that helps quite a bit. Because a lot of it is just has to do with the relationship element, right? And having respect for each other, but also understanding how the team environment is and how it works, right? How people work together. It's tough to do that when you're remote, but we try and find ways to alleviate some of that.
But of course, and then I think a lot of what you mentioned actually carries a lot of weight, of course, when it comes to basically finding a way to connect with your team, right? Setting aside that time for one-on-ones, whether it be in person, whether it be remote, whether it be there's a difficult part about like remote, right? Whereas like in person, you can be like, hey, let's just go for a walk, right? Let's just like step out, let's grab a coffee, let's like casually do something, versus like when everything's over chat, when everything's over email, when it's like through like face-to-face, where it's just like, sure, we're kind of face-to-face here, but there is still that slight awkwardness around like looking into a computer screen for like so long, There
is, and it's almost impossible to not want to check your email and do things along those lines.
Oh, we get distracted all day.
So
an idea where you get like a QR code on your phone at a restaurant and like half the time you're not even checking the menu because you're looking at your phone, right? Like,
right.
It's the
Exactly.
world that we live in. Rather unfortunate. But as we kind of like make our way through here, so building relationships, I mean, I'm a big proponent of in person, right? Even if for me, it's like sometimes like going to New York, crashing on a couch, going to SF, crashing with a friend, meeting in person, kind of like betting on yourself, really trying to get that in-person engagement, right? Like relationships are built in person. Texting, sure, if you already have a relationship, it's easy to maintain.
Yeah.
Phone calls, same idea. Zoom, not so much. Maybe a little bit, but the reality is like in person is next level. If we move to, what is your advice for someone looking to move from a small startup PE shop to IB in a bigger city? I would probably say networking 101, kind of like getting in touch with people. We recommend a lot of our mentees, actually, Yogi, reach out to like 100 people a week on Sundays. A lot of type A individuals kind of like log in and check their week on Sundays for what it's worth around like 5 p.m. ET. And then they're like generally pretty optimistic because it's still the weekend. So if they get emails at that time, it's like, listen, I'd love to like connect with you. Mondays, no chance. Mondays, everyone's just in a fire drill mode.
Yeah.
And then if you reach out to 100 people one week, you follow up with that 100, you add another 100, you get a pipeline, push volume all day. But we'd love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think, first and foremost, I do think networking is key. I think leveraging, your school network is huge, but also your friend network, right? I mean, that's key. I mean, you can certainly send cold emails out. Hit rate is not so great on that, right? But you can certainly try. But when I had success, it was really going through my school network. That's how I was able to land interviews, and because that's when I was looking to get into finance, right? So I leveraged that network, and kind of certainly have a lot of folks in the cross finance in New York, right? And that's where I wanted to be. So certainly, I think networking is critical, to be able to kind of make that switch.
I think, in all honesty, I think what's really interesting is that we work with individuals, the Harvard, Yale, Whartons of the world, the SMUs of the world, the Northeasterns of the world, Binghamtons of the world, all the way through, right? And not like trying to diversify one or the other, but basically a variety of institutions. At its core, we hear this quite a bit, where it's like, okay, like maybe like not that many people break into finance from my undergrad, not that many people broke into finance from my high school. The way I view it is that like if 5 people broke into finance from your undergrad or high school or city or town, hometown, like become best friends with those 5, right? Like literally like do what you can with the cards that are dealt. And then of course kind of focus on the cold side of things. You play golf, sport, something of the sort where it's like having some sort of connection and almost like kind of like pursuing that intangible, I think carries a lot of weight.
Yeah. Well, I think some of that has to do with the fact that I think that advice is helpful in almost any position, right? Forget banking. It's kind of, you can carry it across industries. But if you're looking to specifically get into banking, right, and you have no experience or don't go to a bigger school where you have had a lot of people that have gotten to banking and you don't have that network, right? One of the things certainly you could do is really start with kind of a smaller investment bank, right? So kind of a regional boutique type of investment bank where you can at least get the experience, have banking on your resume, right? You kind of need one bank on your resume to be able to kind of leverage, right? So if your ultimate goal is to go to, let's make it up, your ultimate goal is to go to Goldman Sachs in New York, you go to a small school in the suburbs, right? That may not have that type of network, I would probably look at a smaller investment bank first. That might be your easiest way. A lot of those guys, the challenge is there aren't that many roles, right? I mean, a lot of those guys have just-in-time hiring, right? They don't have formal programs. But if you leverage some of those to kind of work there a year and look at kind of the next big thing, it's another way to kind of do it. It's more work and challenging, and there's nothing guaranteed, obviously, but you kind of need experience to get up there, right? Unless you go to a target school. And that is if your target is Goldman Sachs, for example, right? I'm using them as an example. I'm not saying this is specifically to Goldman, right? But just using that as an example. And it's just, that's kind of one of the challenges, right? At the same time, guys, though, there are plenty of middle market banks, plenty of elite boutiques, upper middle market, lower middle market, where you get effectively the same level of experience, the same type of experience. A lot of the senior guys that work at those banks actually were big bank bankers and then moved down market. And you're getting kind of the same caliber of work. It's just a different client base, right? So I feel like maybe putting a bit more attention onto the middle tier is quite fruitful, can be quite fruitful.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever had anyone kind of reach out to you in the capacity of whether it be more like even offering up work, like a winter internship, a fall internship, spring stuff? Honestly, because I think that's interesting too. A lot of people think about summer, but they don't think about other stuff like during the school year.
I think so too. I mean, just get an entry. Like the larger banks, for example, they have regimented programs, right, to hire. So they it's a bit tougher to kind of land one of the roles, something like that, into those banks, right? But smaller banks, sure, yeah. If you just reach out, a lot of that, like I mentioned, is just in time. So if you're offering to kind of do an internship for a few months, that sometimes is you may have better luck on some of that. So I mean, we have a couple of interns as well that are, we've hired for our Boston office at least, that'll be working, through this fall period. So it certainly helps.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Okay. Was that structured? Was that someone that just kind of like reached out?
No,
Or they
I think they kind
from...
of, one of them carried over from the summer, and another, I think, had just reached out to one of the managing directors, and, we put them in touch.
Cool. Can you speak a little bit more around the different offices with Capstone and tell us a little bit more around what that looks like, dynamics, offsite, bringing people together?
Well, yeah. So our two biggest offices, our headquarters is Boston. Our sister headquarters is in Denver. We've got other offices around the country, which are in, the other bigger offices are probably Chicago, LA, Philly, Dallas. We don't have San Francisco. We used to. We don't anymore. Okay. We have one in Dallas. That's probably our newest office. One in Tampa, Richmond. Wow. Richmond is a decent sized office. We've got about 10 offices around the country. We closed a couple during COVID and did not open them, but we're thinking about reopening our New York office, but we haven't done it quite yet.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's the biggest offices are, like I mentioned, Boston and Denver, right? The other ones are either group specific, like Richmond is our education team is there. Part of our consumer team is down in Tampa. We've got a healthcare team in Philly. We've got industrials team in LA, a little bit more industrials in Dallas as well, and certainly in Chicago, right? And so it's kind of spread a little bit.
Nice. And when it comes to, I guess, even like cross-functional team dynamics, as you work with different types of people, someone comes in and they're like, hey, I want to work with Yogi a little bit more. You bring in someone. Is it like pretty structured? There's opportunity to work with different people?
Yes. So when you mean in terms of a new employee or a new banker?
In terms of yeah, exactly. Like a junior, call it, just so they can get kind of diversity of thought and different experience.
Well, yes, we generally put them through a little bit of a training program. Some of it is we generally hire, one of the bigger training model shops and it switches. So I don't know who is our latest.
Right. That is until we have.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But we have one of those for sure every year and maybe twice a year, depending. Right. So to kind of make sure that modeling skills are top notch for our junior folks and also for new folks that are coming on. Right. So either refresh or new. So we do have that. We've got other training elements as well, but the best training is obviously on the job. Right. So we make sure that we're putting you on deals and pitches and projects and the like where you can really learn, right, effectively and be able to contribute. We know that first year analysts can't really contribute from day one, right? That's okay. As long as you're driven and you want to be here and put in the work to be able to learn, we'll help you out, right? We'll get you there.
I love it. As you think about, call it resources that you recommend, of course, other than office hours, but just in general, like resources, books, readings, learnings, whether it be stuff that you did in business school, stuff that you do today, stuff that you recommend for juniors, stuff that you come across recently. Honestly, we can incorporate magazines, podcasts, and I'll make note.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think my favorites to keep on track of markets are probably the usual stuff, right? I mean, Wall Street Journal, Economist type of stuff. Some listen to Bloomberg, listen to Seeking Alpha, right? Things along those lines. But at the same time, in terms of reading or in terms of books, certainly, I guess it's hard to say, well, it's not old now, right? Because I haven't read these types of books. Yeah. Well, those are great to kind of just get a sense. But at the same time, one of my favorites was A Random Walk Down Wall Street when I was starting business school. That was great and very easy to understand, especially for somebody who's a career switcher, right? And no idea about finance. I would say, obviously, I liked Rosenbaum's book quite a bit. I recommend that to a lot of folks, especially who are looking to get into investment banking. It's very practical. Other valuation books, got a few, but those are probably it. So I would say, look, I mean, keep abreast of markets, keep abreast of what's happening, but don't just know what's happening. Develop a thought. Develop your own views. Make sure when you kind of go to an interview. I like to sometimes ask people, like, what have you read recently, right? Or what kind of M&A stories are you following? What have you seen? What deals have you seen in the market? What do you think about them, right? More so. Just want to understand how people think, right? And how interested are they, right? So I can regurgitate a story as well, right? But I want to make sure that people can actually think for themselves and really have an interest in this space.
Makes total sense. I think parlays into kind of like the interesting part on our end. Call it M&A amongst banks as a whole, consolidation as a whole, what you've seen in banking. And I guess, the real question is how you've seen banking change over the last, call it close, like 5, 10 years, and kind of like where you see the market going for advisory as a whole over the next 5 to 10 years?
I think advisory is obviously I'm bullish on advisory, right? Otherwise, I'd try and find my way out of here. But no, I'm very bullish on advisory. I think kind of having that service level to your clients is unmatched. Right. Some of these, there are folks out there, I've seen folks kind of overseas that say, hey, we'll do your modeling work for you, or we'll do some presentation work for you and the like, right? Look, I mean, from a mechanical standpoint, some of that stuff helps, but it's not the end all be all by any means. I think it's just to support. At the end of the day, M&A advisory, I don't think is going away, and I think is flourishing more than anything, right? If you follow the wave of consolidation that's still happening now, right? It's down from last year, but it's still pretty active now. There is no substitute for face-to-face personal advising, right, on an M&A standpoint. So I'm certainly quite bullish on it. That's why I've developed my career in it, and that's what excites me, and be able to kind of talk to clients, talk to new clients, talk to existing clients, give them valuable advice that really helps them reach this kind of pinnacle in life and this game-changing or life-changing event that you're walking them through and helping them through, which is, sale transaction. You cannot really do that remotely. Right. You've got to have someone face to face type of situation. And you've got to have that personal connection there to give that advice, if that makes sense.
Yep. You mentioned this earlier, actually, honestly, kind of like a little bit more around like knowing what you really like. How does one do that as a 20-year-old? Right? As they kind of like think about that. Sure, one could be like, okay, I'm interested in technology and stuff like that, but it's definitely difficult as you kind of like think about it, right?
Yeah. So some of what happens, so let's put it this way. I mean, because Capstone, maybe I'll use this example. Our junior folks, at least in our Boston and Denver offices are generalists. So when they come in, they're not allocated or dedicated to any industry team. They could be working on a consumer deal one day. They could be working on a tech deal. They could be working on a business services deal another day, right? So they're generalists. They get a feel for, different industries, and they're getting exposure to different managing directors, different types of clients and the like. And over time, you kind of figure out and naturally gravitate towards picking a couple of different industries. And the further up you move, the narrower that focus becomes, right? And at some point, you are then just focused on a particular industry. That's one way to go about it, right? If you're working at a large bank, you could go the product side too, right? And say, look, I love doing equity offerings, right? Whether it's an IPO, secondary follow-on, whatever it may be. I don't care about the industry. I just care about working in public equity markets. And so you may be an investment banker just doing ECM, right? Equity capital markets work. So you may be more product focused, right? Similar can apply to the debt side of the house, the debt capital markets. Similarly, you could be as part of a mergers and acquisitions team and work on a healthcare M&A deal and a consumer deal and whatever. But your goal would be just doing M&A all day long, right? You don't really have the client relationships there because they're someone else's client, but you are the expert at M&A. So the larger banks typically have industry coverage teams married with these kind of product teams, right? And so those can be valuable for sure on especially larger, more complex transactions, I think, but especially ones that are in need of kind of capital markets. However, at lower middle market, elite boutique, middle market, you are likely going to be gravitating towards a particular industry as opposed to product set, right? Because the products aren't really the same, if that makes sense.
It does. As you think about a little bit more, I mean, I guess we can get into a little bit more like rapid fire as you kind of wrap up here. Feel free to let us know if anyone has any remaining questions. A couple different things that I want to definitely discuss. Consumer trends that excite you, kind of like as you think about this, right? Because the whole idea is like really pursuing what you like as a whole. And of course, trying to get in front of those companies. Then it helps out when it comes to reading, not to mention, of course, following those businesses as a whole. So then hopefully work doesn't really feel like work. What excites you in the consumer space and what's kind of changed over the last few years and what's kind of to come? I'm sure it's very consumer tech going forward, but we'll have to learn.
Yeah. I mean, it's some of that, and let's stick it with the place that I really spend my time is automotive, as you know. But if you kind of look at that particular sector, kind of look at changing technologies, right, especially more recently, and what's been happening with, digitization and connected vehicles and obviously electrification, right, and the like, right? However, when I look at the traditional aftermarket, which is more of my focus, right, is a wave of consolidation going on across various different sectors, right? And there is a tremendous amount of private equity capital being put into place So kind of seeing where really educating sponsors, educating investors, helping them understand kind of the benefits of this sector or this industry overall, how it ties to the overall economy and how the macro drivers interplay effectively is quite fascinating, right? And at the end of the day, it's consumer driven, right? If you look at the vehicle market, majority of it is consumer driven at the end of the day, right? And obviously there's B2B in that space, but vast majority is consumer. So how do gas prices impact miles driven, for example, right? And how does technology drive the number of how often vehicles are used and how they're used, right? And who owns them, which is one of the key things. All of that is changing around us. And so there's just rapid amount of technology, regulation, socioeconomic impacts, right? There are so many different factors that really drive the space. But frankly, I mean, I can say a lot of those things around food, right? And I can say that around personal care and the like as well, right? So I'm part of obviously, I'm a senior member of our consumer team, but these types of dynamics interplay across the board. But there's certainly a lot of different things, right? I feel like you need another podcast to kind of go into detail there around trends within specific industries.
Yep. No, that makes sense. And as we kind of get to our final few minutes here, any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Interview process for juniors, if you're able to speak to it a little bit. What sort of outreach tactics, what sort of outreach I don't know, like when were you impressed by a junior, right? What do they do? Or effectively, what did the conversation look like? Do they go in like really prepared, knowing more and more kind of like what the transaction list, have a pretty good understanding what they were signing up for?
My favorite is, maybe not favorite, but I think one of the areas where folks can kind of differentiate themselves is, look, I mean, I think the basics are to read the investment bank's website, right? Read about some of the deals that they've done, go on the LinkedIn profile of the folks that are interviewing you, right? Understand their background. That's all good and well. But at the end of the day, if you are really trying to get into banking and you're actually doing something about it in terms of not just outreaching, trying to get an interview, but actually setting yourself apart and doing modeling courses and trying to build your own models and things like that as a junior banker, those are some differentiators, right? And that's what I did, right? When I was a junior getting in as a career switcher. I mean, I spent a lot of time during business school, remembering my model was probably pretty bad when I kind of think back on it, but I spent a lot of time doing like a take private of IBM. Right. I just said, let me just pick a big public company and I'm going to go, do a DCF on it. And probably sure it was pretty wrong, but that's okay. I refined it quite a bit and worked with some of the people at school who had banking internships and the like to kind of point out my errors, but also just you kind of struggle your way through it. Right. So building this 3-statement model with the DCF, and I didn't do an LBO, straight take private by strategic. And so working along those lines effectively. Right. And then, but more so than that, I mean, just putting it into a 10-page presentation. So I literally remember going to Deutsche Bank and JP Morgan during my, interviews and being like, look at what I did. And I'm serious about this, right? This is what I want to do. And I spent my free time, right, during business school to be able to kind of do this. So maybe that's an extreme example to a certain degree, but it was helpful quite a bit. And I think it just sets you apart.
I love it.
It's one way to do it, right? It's not the only, but just one way.
No, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, of course, on the preparation side of things, the world that we live in tends to have quite a lot of resources out there, right? So from that perspective, kind of going in prepared. And then, of course, part of it is anyone that's looking into Capstone as a whole, we'll be sharing with them the recording here with yourself as well, just to let them know a little bit more kind of like background, right? And kind of like what that looks like. Advice you have, kind of like final parting words, advice you have for juniors going forward, or advice you would have given yourself as a junior now knowing everything you know?
I think don't be afraid to, don't mean to be too generic about this, but just don't be afraid to take some risks, right? And be able to push yourself beyond where you are. Some junior folks that I have seen in the past that have not advanced, or maybe not advanced as quickly as they should have, I think just become too complacent to a certain degree, right? You get too comfortable with what you're doing and you do your job and you move on, right? Or do the deal or do your pitch and you move on. But always, if you can continuously remember to push yourself and seek the next best thing and reach out to folks above you and seek how you can try something new and take more responsibility, I think just shows how much you care. And that is recognized. It's absolutely recognized. And I did do that, but I would have certainly loved to do more of that, right? And I'd certainly urge, junior folks to always think about that. No matter, it doesn't matter how good you get at modeling, or, for example, it's if you have that attitude, it's valuable. Fortunately, Rohit, I've got to hop for another call in 1 minute, but maybe we can, if you don't mind.
So sorry, real quick, 30 seconds on the rapid fire. When did you decide banking was for you?
When?
Or like full time, like long term?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I really started, obviously, first couple of years after business school, you struggle through it, but you learn the entire time, and it's great. After that, once I became pretty efficient at what I was doing, was enjoying it, traveling, was getting to work on different deals, you just kind of fall in love with it, right? And that's what you do.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure part of it was, of course, the industry and, of course, like the people that you interacted with. Part
Absolutely.
of the entrepreneurial kick.
Absolutely.
I love it. Thank you. I don't want to take up more time, even though we got like multiple questions at the end here. Really appreciate you doing this. Any other questions? Are you okay with people reaching out on LinkedIn, email? If you get inundated, obviously, for what you're able to respond to.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, if there's ones that would help the office hours posting, maybe just you and I can get on the phone again. I'll just answer a bunch and we can throw them on your website.
Cool. Perfect. I'll save a couple of these down. Thanks again. I'll let you
got
it. Appreciate it, everyone.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Of course. Have a good one.